My name is Emma, and this story starts with a lie, a big, ugly one that I didn't see coming until it hit me like a freight train. You know how they say hindsight is 20/20? Well, let me tell you, right now, all I can think about are the little things he said or didn't say that should have tipped me off. But back then, I was too busy being in love to notice. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Tuesdays were always our lazy days. We'd stay in bed late, drink coffee together, and talk nonsense while sunlight streamed through the cracks in the blinds. That day started out no different. I still choke on his name sometimes, was scrolling through his phone, half listening to me ramble about some article I'd read about climate change. He had this habit of nodding along without really paying attention, but I never called him out on it because honestly, who doesn't do that? Did you even hear what I just said? I teased, nudging him playfully. Yeah, he muttered, distractedly, his eyes glued to whatever meme or tweet had caught his attention. Something about polar bears drowning. I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smiling. God, I loved him so much. Even his quirks, the way he always left his socks balled up under the couch, or how he'd hum random songs off-key when he thought no one was listening, they made him him. And for 4 years, I thought I knew exactly who that was. But then came the moment that shattered everything. We were sitting at the kitchen table later that evening, picking at leftovers from last night's Chinese takeout. The air felt heavy, though I didn't realize why until Lucas cleared his throat and said, "Emma, there's something I need to tell you." My stomach dropped instantly. Those words, the tone, the hesitation, it was like hearing nails screech across a chalkboard. "What?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He wouldn't look at me. Instead, he stared down at his hands, twisting them around like he was trying to wring out water. "This isn't easy," he began, pausing every few seconds as if searching for the right words. "But I don't think I've ever been completely honest with you." My heart thudded painfully against my ribcage. "About what?" He finally looked up, but his gaze wasn't soft or apologetic like I expected. It was cold, distant, like he was looking at a stranger. "About us," he said flatly. "About how I feel, or rather, how I don't feel." For a second, I thought I misheard him. Maybe I'd misunderstood. "Wait, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," he sighed, running a hand through his messy brown hair, "I don't love you, Emma. Not the way you deserve. Hell, maybe not at all." The room spun. My breath hitched, and suddenly I couldn't swallow past the lump in my throat. "Are you kidding me right now?" I snapped, my voice cracking. "After 4 years, you're just gonna sit here and tell me this?" "It's not like I planned it," he shot back, defensive now. "I tried to make it work, okay? I thought maybe I could grow into it, but I can't keep pretending anymore." Pretending. That word stung worse than anything else. All those nights where we laughed until our sides hurt, all those mornings where we shared quiet smiles over coffee. He'd been faking it, every single moment. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something at him. But instead, I sat there frozen, staring at him like he was a ghost. Because in a way, he was. The man I thought I knew. The man I gave 4 years of my life to didn't exist. When I finally found my voice, it came out barely above a whisper. "Why now? Why after all this time?" He shrugged, avoiding my eyes again. "I don't know. I guess I just couldn't live with the guilt anymore." Guilt, of course. Always thinking about himself, even in this moment. Typical Lucas. And then, before I could process anything further, he stood up, grabbed his keys, and walked out the door. Just like that. No goodbye, no explanation beyond the bare minimum. Nothing. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time lost all meaning after that. I sat alone in the darkened apartment, clutching my knees to my chest and replaying his words over and over in my head. How could someone fake love for so long? Was any of it real, or was I just fooling myself this whole time? Eventually, I reached for my phone, hoping against hope that he'd text me, call me, anything. But when I opened Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the places we used to share bits of our lives, he was gone, blocked, erased, as if I'd never existed. That's when the tears finally came. They poured out of me uncontrollably, hot and relentless, soaking into the sleeves of my oversized sweater. For the first time in 4 years, I felt truly alone. By Wednesday morning, reality began to sink in. I called in sick to work, unable to face anyone. My best friend Sophie showed up unannounced with a box of donuts and a bottle of wine. She took one look at me and said, "Okay, spill. What happened?" So I told her everything, from the conversation at the kitchen table to the devastating aftermath. By the end, she was gripping my hand so tightly it hurt. "That bastard," she hissed, her normally bubbly demeanor replaced by pure fury. "How could he do this to you?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice hoarse from crying. "Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe I never was." Sophie shook her head vehemently. "Don't you dare blame yourself for his crap. This isn't your fault, Em. None of it." Her words brought a small measure of comfort, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow I must have missed the signs. If only I'd paid closer attention. Maybe I could have saved myself from this pain. As the days dragged on, I found myself obsessively replaying memories, dissecting every interaction, every word Lucas ever said. Had he always been this selfish, this detached, or had he changed somewhere along the way? And most importantly, why did he stay with me for so long if he didn't care? These questions haunted me, gnawing at my mind like a persistent itch. Couldn't scratch. But answers weren't going to come easily. In fact, I wasn't sure I'd ever get them. All I knew was that I needed to pick up the pieces of my shattered heart and figure out how to move forward. Because despite everything, one thing was clear. Lucas might have left, but I wasn't about to let him take me down with him. The days that followed Lucas's confession were a blur of sleepless nights, tear-streaked pillows, pillows, and an overwhelming sense of emptiness. I felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my chest and left me lying in the rubble, gasping for air. Every morning, I woke up expecting things to be normal again, hoping it was all just some twisted nightmare. But reality slapped me across the face every time I reached for my phone and saw his name blocked on every app. Sophie became my lifeline during those first few weeks. She called me at least 3 times a day, checking in with relentless determination. "You better not ghost me," she'd say, her voice firm but laced with concern. "I swear, Emma, if you don't answer, I'm showing up at your door with pancakes and bad karaoke." Her humor helped, even when I didn't think anything could. But there were moments, long, suffocating stretches of silence, when I couldn't muster the energy to laugh or respond or even move. Those were the hardest parts. The moments when loneliness wasn't just a feeling, it was a physical weight, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after it happened, Sophie dragged me out of the apartment for what she called a mandatory pity party. We went to this tiny cafe downtown, the kind of place where baristas knew your order by heart, and indie music played softly in the background. It smelled like freshly ground coffee and baked goods, which usually would have made me happy. Instead, I sat there picking at a muffin, staring blankly into space while Sophie rattled off stories about her coworkers' ridiculous antics. "And then Greg spilled an entire pot of soup on himself during lunch," she said, laughing so hard tears formed in the corners of her eyes. When she noticed I hadn't cracked a smile, her expression softened. "Hey," she said gently, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Talk to me. What's going on in that head of yours?" I hesitated, unsure how much I wanted to share. Part of me still felt embarrassed, like admitting how hurt I was would somehow make me look weak, but Sophie wasn't the type to judge. So I took a deep breath and let the words tumble out. "I keep thinking about all the little things," I admitted, twisting the napkin in my lap, "like how he used to kiss my forehead before bed, or how he'd always grab me an extra packet of ketchup whenever we got takeout. Was any of it real? Or was he just pretending the whole time?" Sophie frowned, considering my question. "Honestly, probably both," she said finally. "People are complicated, Em. He might have meant those gestures back then, even if they don't mean much now. That doesn't excuse what he did, but it also doesn't mean you imagined everything." Her words gave me something to hold on to, a sliver of hope that maybe I hadn't been completely delusional. Still, it didn't erase the ache inside me, the constant wondering why. A few days later, I decided to confront the source of my pain directly, or at least try. Against Sophie's advice, "Are you sure this is a good idea?" I drove to Lucas's office building. I told myself I needed closure, though deep down I think I was hoping he'd apologize, explain himself, maybe even beg for forgiveness. Pathetic, right? When I arrived, nerves coiled tightly in my stomach. I lingered outside the glass doors, watching people come and go, rehearsing what I wanted to say in my head. Finally, I mustered the courage to step inside. The lobby was sleek and modern, with polished floors and abstract art hanging on the walls. A receptionist greeted me politely from behind a desk. "Hi, I'm here to see Lucas," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to sound confident. She glanced at her computer screen. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but—" "I'm sorry, ma'am," she interrupted, her tone clipped. "He's unavailable right now." Unavailable. Of course he was. Probably hiding upstairs, too cowardly to face me. Anger flared in my chest, sharp and unexpected. Before I could stop myself, I blurted out, "Tell him Emma stopped by. And tell him—" My voice wavered, and I swallowed hard. "Tell him blocking me won't make this go away." The receptionist blinked, clearly uncomfortable. "I'll pass along the message." But as I turned to leave, I caught sight of movement out of the corner of my eye. There he was, Lucas, standing near the elevators, talking to another woman. She was tall and blonde, wearing a fitted blazer and heels that clicked sharply against the floor. They laughed together, their body language relaxed, almost intimate. My knees nearly buckled beneath me. For a split second, I thought about marching over there, demanding answers. But instead, I stood frozen, watching them through the haze of tears clouding my vision. Then, without another word, I walked out. On the drive home, rage simmered beneath the surface, bubbling over into tears once I was safely alone in my car. How dare he? How dare he treat me like I was disposable, replaceable? Who was she? Had she been part of the reason he left? Or was she just the next chapter in whatever selfish story he was writing? By the time I pulled into my parking spot, I was shaking. Not from sadness anymore, but from anger. Pure, unfiltered fury. Enough was enough. If Lucas wanted to cut me out of his life, fine, but I wasn't going to sit around wallowing forever. I deserved better than that. That night, I opened a bottle of wine, grabbed a notebook, and started writing. At first, it was just random thoughts, things I wished I'd said to him, questions I still didn't have answers to. But soon, it evolved into something more, a plan, a way to reclaim my power. Step 1, delete his number. Step 2, block him everywhere. Step 3, start living for me, not for us. It sounds simple, almost cliche, but trust me, it wasn't easy. Every time I looked at his contact info, memories flooded back, threatening to pull me under again. But I forced myself to hit delete. Anyway, watching his name vanish from my phone felt like closing a chapter I never wanted to revisit. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into work, spending late nights at the office finishing projects I'd neglected during my post-breakup haze. I reconnected with old friends, joined a yoga class on Sophie's insistence, and even signed up for a painting workshop, anything to keep busy, to remind myself that I was more than the sum of my broken relationship. Still, Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. Late at night, lying awake in bed, I'd wonder if I'd ever feel whole again. Would I always carry this scar, this reminder of how easily love can turn to ash? Then one evening, as I sat cross-legged on my living room floor, surrounded by half-finished canvases, I realized something important. Healing isn't linear. Some days would be better than others, and that was okay. What mattered most was that I kept moving forward, however slow and messy it might be. And for the first time since Lucas walked out, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I'd find happiness again, on my own terms. It's funny how life has a way of sneaking up on you when you least expect it. One minute, you're convinced you'll never recover from the wreckage of your past, and the next, you're standing in the middle of a crowded art gallery, sipping cheap wine and pretending to understand abstract paintings. That's where I found myself 3 months after Lucas disappeared from my life, a place I never would have imagined being just a year earlier. The painting workshop I joined on a whim had somehow turned into something more than therapy. It became a lifeline. My instructor, an eccentric woman named Marcy who wore oversized glasses and smelled perpetually of turpentine, encouraged me to submit one of my pieces to a local exhibit. "You've got talent, kid," she'd said, clapping me on the back with enough force to make me stumble. "Don't waste it." So there I was, staring at my own artwork hanging on the wall, a chaotic swirl of colors meant to represent heartbreak and healing. The title? Fragments. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt proud of something. The gallery buzzed with energy, people chatting, laughing, critiquing each other's work. I hovered near the snack table, nursing a glass of red wine and debating whether or not to mingle. Socializing still felt awkward, like wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. But then Sophie appeared out of nowhere, dragging along her boyfriend Ryan, who looked equally uncomfortable in his button-up shirt and loafers. "You didn't tell me this was fancy," he whispered loudly as they approached me. "It's not fancy," Sophie shot back, rolling her eyes. "Stop being dramatic." I laughed despite myself. Their bickering was oddly comforting, a reminder that some things never change. When they finally reached me, Sophie threw her arms around me in a hug so tight I nearly spilled my drink. "You're amazing," she gushed, pulling back to study my face. "Seriously, Em, look at you, all artsy and sophisticated." "I'm literally wearing jeans," I pointed out, gesturing to my outfit. "And yet you still managed to pull it off," she teased, winking. "Now come on, let's go show Ryan how cultured we are." As we wandered through the gallery, I couldn't help but notice the curious glances people gave my painting. Some nodded approvingly, others tilted their heads in confusion, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that I'd created something tangible, something that existed outside the chaos in my head. For once, I felt seen, not as Emma the heartbroken girlfriend, but as Emma the artist. But just as I started to relax, enjoying the warmth of validation, a familiar voice cut through the noise like a knife. Well, look who decided to get creative." My blood ran cold. Slowly, I turned to see Lucas standing a few feet away, flanked by the same blonde woman I'd spotted outside his office weeks ago. She draped herself casually over his arm, her perfectly manicured nails resting possessively on his sleeve. He looked different, cleaner, somehow, like he'd scrubbed away all the rough edges I used to love about him. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He shrugged nonchalantly, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Just supporting local artists. Didn't realize you were one of them." "Funny coincidence," I muttered under my breath. The blonde woman leaned forward, inspecting my painting with exaggerated interest. "Oh, this is yours?" she asked, arching a perfectly plucked eyebrow. "It's interesting, thanks," I replied flatly, resisting the urge to roll my eyes. "Who's your friend?" Lucas hesitated, clearly unprepared for the question. This is Claire. We, work together." Claire smiled sweetly, though there was something predatory about the way she sized me up. "Nice to meet you," she purred, extending a hand. Her grip was firmer than necessary, almost like a challenge. "Likewise," I said, forcing a polite smile before turning back to Lucas. "Listen, I don't know why you're here, but if you came to stir up drama, save it. I'm done with that chapter." His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might argue, but instead, he nodded stiffly. "Fair enough. Enjoy your night." As they walked away, I exhaled a shaky breath, my heart pounding like a drum. Sophie reappeared beside me, her expression fierce. "What did he want?" "Nothing," I said, shaking my head. "Just trying to rattle me, I guess." "Sure," she muttered, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "Forget about him. Let's focus on celebrating you." She was right, of course. But as much as I tried to push Lucas out of my mind, seeing him again stirred up emotions I thought I'd buried. Old insecurities resurfaced, whispering cruel lies about how I wasn't good enough, smart enough, pretty enough. By the end of the night, I was exhausted. Not from the event itself, but from fighting the urge to spiral back into self-doubt. The next morning, I woke up groggy and irritable, haunted by flashes of the previous night. Instead of dwelling on it, I decided to channel my frustration into action. I spent hours in my tiny kitchen baking cookies, a recipe I hadn't attempted since college, and blasting angry playlists until my neighbors probably regretted living next door. Cooking had always been my form of meditation, a way to quiet the storm raging inside me. When Sophie showed up later that afternoon bearing coffee and gossip, I greeted her with a plate of slightly burnt chocolate chip cookies. "These better be edible," she joked, taking a cautious bite. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Okay, wow, these are actually really good." "Told you," I said smugly, flopping on onto the couch beside her. Baking fixes everything. Not everything, she corrected gently, but it helps. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, munching on cookies and sipping coffee. Eventually, she broke the quiet. Do you think you'll ever forgive him? I stared at her, caught off guard by the question. Forgive him? After everything he put me through? I'm not saying you should, she clarified quickly, but holding on to anger can eat you alive, you know? At some point, you have to decide whether it's worth it. Her words lingered long after she left. Could I forgive Lucas? More importantly, did I even want to? Forgiveness didn't mean excusing his actions. It meant letting go of the hold they had over me. And honestly, I wasn't sure I was ready for that yet. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into new projects, determined to keep moving forward. I started volunteering at a community center teaching kids how to paint, which turned out to be surprisingly rewarding. Watching their faces light up as they discovered their own creativity reminded me why I fell in love with art in the first place. One evening, as I packed up supplies after class, a little girl named Mia tugged on my sleeve. Miss Emma? She asked shyly, holding out a colorful scribble. Can you sign this? So I remember it forever. Tears pricked my eyes as I scrawled my name across the corner of her masterpiece. In that moment, I realized something profound. Healing doesn't happen overnight. It's a series of small victories, moments of joy stitched together like patchwork. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally starting to piece myself back together. 6 months had passed since the art gallery encounter with Lucas. And though I'd told myself I was over him, over us, there were still nights when his absence lingered like a shadow in the corners of my mind. But those moments grew fewer and farther between as life began to fill the void he left behind. And honestly, it wasn't just life, it was me. Slowly but surely, I was learning how to take up space again, to exist not as someone's partner or ex, but as Emma, just Emma. It started with little things, buying bright yellow curtains for my bedroom because they made me smile, taking long walks through the park without checking my phone every 5 minutes, saying yes to invitations instead of hiding under the covers. Then came bigger changes, a promotion at work, a solo trip to visit Sophie in Vancouver, even signing up for a public speaking class, something I never thought I'd have the guts to do. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I hadn't realized was missing. But the most surprising shift happened one rainy Saturday afternoon while I was sorting through old boxes in the back of my closet. Buried beneath piles of forgotten keepsakes, I found a journal from college, a leather-bound notebook filled with doodles, poetry, and rambling thoughts about love and loss. Flipping through its pages, I stumbled upon a quote I'd scribbled in the margin years ago. Sometimes the hardest part isn't letting go, it's learning how to live after. I stared at those words for a long time, feeling their weight settle deep in my chest. Letting go of Lucas, the idea of us, had been painful, yes, but living afterward, that was the real challenge. And somehow, against all odds, I was doing it. A few weeks later, I received an email that threw me completely off balance. It was from Lucas. At first, I almost deleted it without reading. What could he possibly have to say to me now? But curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked open the message. I'm sorry, Emma. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and honestly, I wouldn't blame you if you ignored this. But I've spent the last few months thinking about everything that happened between us, and I feel like I owe you an explanation, even if it doesn't fix anything. The truth is, I was scared. Not of loving you. I did love you, in my own messed up way, but of being loved back. You deserved so much more than I could give, and instead of facing that, I ran. I hurt you because I couldn't handle hurting myself. It was selfish, cowardly, and unfair to you. For that, I am truly sorry. I hope someday you find someone who can appreciate everything about you, the kindness, the strength, the light you bring into people's lives, because you deserve nothing less. Take care, Lucas. For a long time, I sat, staring at the screen, unsure what to feel. Relief, anger, gratitude. None of those emotions seemed big enough to encompass the complexity of what I was experiencing. Part of me wanted to write back, to ask him why he hadn't said any of this sooner, or at all during our relationship. Another part of me wanted to delete the email and pretend it never existed. In the end, I chose neither. Instead, I closed my laptop and went for a walk. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under pale sunlight. As I wandered aimlessly through the neighborhood, I replayed his words in my head, dissecting them like fragments of a puzzle. Did I believe him? Could I forgive him? Eventually, I decided it didn't matter. His apology, or lack thereof, didn't define me anymore. What mattered was how far I'd come since that day in the kitchen when he shattered my world. I wasn't the same person who'd begged for answers or cried herself to sleep every night. I was stronger now, whole. That evening, I called Sophie. You'll never guess what happened, I said as soon as she picked up. Ooh, juicy gossip, she teased. Spill. So I told her about. When I finished, there was a pause on the other end of the line. The email, word for word. What are you going to do? She asked finally. I'm not sure, I admitted. Maybe nothing. Maybe respond eventually. Honestly, it doesn't feel as important as it would have 6 months ago. She laughed softly. That's because you've moved on, Em. Whether you realize it or not, you're not waiting for closure from him anymore. You gave it to yourself. Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. She was right. I had moved on. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to know that my happiness didn't depend on Lucas or anyone else. It belonged to me. Fast forward 2 months, and something incredible happened. A local bookstore reached out to me, asking if I'd be interested in hosting an art exhibit featuring my paintings, alongside works by other emerging artists. The theme? Resilience. When When they explained their vision, tears welled in my eyes, not out of sadness, but pride. My journey, from heartbreak to healing, from doubt to discovery, wasn't just mine anymore. It was a story worth sharing, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we carry within us the power to rebuild. On opening night, the gallery buzzed with energy. Friends, strangers, and even some former coworkers mingled among the artwork, discussing themes of survival and hope. I stood near the entrance, clutching a glass of sparkling water, overwhelmed by gratitude. This wasn't just an exhibition. It was proof that I'd survived and thrived. As the crowd thinned, Sophie appeared beside me, grinning ear to ear. "Told you people would love your stuff," she said, nudging me playfully. "They're not here for me," I replied, shaking my head. "They're here for the message." She raised an eyebrow. "And who created the message?" I laughed, pulling her into a hug. "Fine, point taken." Later that night, as I locked up the gallery and walked home under a canopy of stars, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was beautiful in its imperfection. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace it fully. Because sometimes the hardest part isn't letting go. It's learning how to live after. And I was living, not just surviving, but thriving.